Hello and welcome back to the second channel. Today I'm going to be doing a deck profile for a card for the E-card format. For anyone who does not know, the E-card format just contains the three English E-card sets, being Expedition, Aquapolis, and Skyridge. This format is not very often played, almost never with events, pretty much only exclusively played casually. One of those reasons is, of course, the cost of owning these cards in real life, and another reason is that most of the decks are just kind of solved at this point. It's not a meta where people are doing a lot of advancing. If you've played the format, you'll know that Gengar is arguably the best deck in the format. There are some other really strong strategies that move energy around the board and can deal strong attacks, but realistically the strongest deck in the current known E-card metagame, unless something changes, is Gengar. Since Gengar is able to just essentially infinitely wall the opponent as a hit and run strategy. This deck is a deck that has an almost 100% win rate against Gengar as long as it gets set up, and frankly this deck wins against almost everything, but it is a bit hard to set up. The one thing that you do lose against is fighting types. You do not have good recourse for those. Tyranitar Control is a deck that I started designing because I just thought the card had potential in the E-card format, and I was happy to know that's even better than I expected. Starting off, we have 4 copies of Larvitar. You'll have to excuse them being proxies. I cannot afford to build E-card decks. Larvitar is actually a very good basic, and it's part of why this deck works. Larvitar has the Mountain Eater attack, which says your opponent discards the top card of your deck and then heals Larvitar for 10. Both of those effects are very important. One of them, the healing effect, is actually important because if your opponent just has a weak attacker, you can just keep on milling them over and over while you set up. It's pretty likely that in a format as slow as E-card, if you start a Larvitar as your active Pokemon, and you likely will considering it's half of the basics in this deck, then you'll be able to just mill your opponent for like 4 or 5 turns before they're actually able to knock it out. Even if you have nothing else going on your board, you can still take some cards off in the early game. This is both a control and mill deck kind of built into one. So being able to mill the opponent, if you mill, important supporter cards, or primarily energy is what we're looking to mill, then that is very good. The healing effect is also useful, of course, because you can keep Larvitar alive. The milling effect, reach that deck out condition. We'll come back to the milling attack because it is relevant. 4 copies of Pupitar. Only thing to note about this guy is that 80 HP is very bulky. His attack is okay, but ultimately we're not going to be using the Thrash attack. It's just a damaging attack. You do not want to be putting 3 energy on your Pupitar though, if at all possible. Finally, we have 4 copies of Tyranitar, the main build-around of the deck. Tyranitar is mainly here for a couple of reasons. One, it has 120 HP, which is a very large amount of HP, the largest you can have at this time. So it's very big. And then its other main attribute is its Destructive Roar attack, which is essentially Crushing Hammer. You flip a coin if heads, you discard an energy attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon. And essentially, the best thing about this attack is that you can just run your opponent out of energy. This deck takes advantage of how low the general damage of attacks are in this format, along with some healing cards to essentially make Tyranitar last a really long time, and in that time you're going to be able to get rid of multiple of the opponent's energy. If your opponent's a deck reliant on special energy, they're going to completely run out. If they're a deck reliant on basic energy, they're probably going to whiff an attack eventually, and that's when you really start taking control of the game. So that's the attack you're going to be using 95% of the time. Tyranitar does have 2 other attacks. Tail Slap is just Darkness, colorless for 30. It's a pretty decent damaging attack. Do keep in mind that we have special Darkness energy in this format, which will boost that damage. However, it actually usually will not. I will explain why in a little bit. But Tail Slap is not really that great of an attack. Usually when I've found myself using this attack, I have actually lost games to it. I have had times where I underestimated what an opponent could pull off, and they had a lot of energy on an attacker, so I decided to start attacking it with my Tail Slap attack, and I went, oh, okay, I'll just knock it out in like 3 or 4 attacks instead of trying to get rid of its 7 energy. Getting rid of the energy is almost always the correct choice in this deck. You will win the war of attrition, you just have to get on your feet to begin with. And the other attack is actually quite good. Giga Crush is for dark, colorless, so 5 energy attack. Very expensive. each player discards the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. Now this is one of the things that Larvitar is great for, is you put your opponents on less cards in deck by the end of the game, that way you can use this attack. And by the end of the game, it's possible to actually build up the Tyranitar to unleash some Giga Crush attacks. You have to do this strategically because, you know, a wrong move could set you back a couple of turns, but if you're able to get yourself in a position where you can use Giga Crush, you can essentially make it so your opponent just decks out first. You have to be very careful with this attack, but we have a way in the deck to help us get around that limitation. We have 2 other Pokemon lines in the deck. I'm first going to talk about Porygon. He's actually pretty good, for a basic anyway. He's got an attack called Data Sort. Flip a coin if heads, choose a trainer card from your discard pile, show it to your opponent, and shuffle it into your deck. This is actually quite good. If you have like an energy removal 2 in your early hand, I've had positions where I haven't really had a lot going on, but I have an okay hand. I don't really care about clunking up my deck. So I'm just going to use energy removal 2, get a removal off, and then use Porygon to potentially put that card back in the deck. If you're going to retreat Porygon anyway, it's better to use the attack before you would retreat it into a no energy attacker most of the time, so definitely a decent attack to keep in mind. Do be wary of that 40 HP on all of your basics so far mentioned. Porygon 2 is here for backup. Once during your turn, you can draw until you have 3 cards in your hand, so same ability as Mew EX from the Scarlet Violet era, a Rangaroo if you played during the Sun and Moon era. Very, very good ability. However, in this format, there's actually no hand thinners in the same way. So you do not have things like Ultra Ball, you know, to thin your hand down. You don't have a ton of trainer cards that you're going to be wanting to burn either, especially because we're a mill deck, we're a control deck. We want to keep our resources, well, we're not usually looping our resources too much, but we're going to be trying to run our opponent out of resources first. So it's usually not correct just to thin down your trainer cards for minimal effect. It's better to just hold them for maximum effect when you're playing this. So you actually don't get a lot of usage out of backup, or so you would think. We have another line to help with that. We have 2 copies of Sentret. His attacks are really, really bad. That's all I have to say. But he is at 50 HP, I guess. Furret is the main draw here. Furret has the Scavenger Hunt, ability, Pokemon Power, which says that you put 2 cards from your hand on top of your deck and then search your deck for any energy card. This can be special energy, and in fact we only play special energy, so we actually don't have any way to search the energy out of the deck besides our friend Furret here. So we have only 12 energy, and it's kind of hard to find. Furret is in fact really, really good though at finding that energy when you want it. Very, very good at doing that. And Furret also has a triple purpose in this deck of helping with putting cards back into the deck. One of those is with Porygon 2. This is an engine that's pretty decent in the e-card format. You can put cards from your hand back into your deck and either find energy or fail to search. Attach the energy if you do find it, and then you have less cards in hand, which will allow you to use Porygon 2's backup more often. It's not the most powerful draw engine on Earth, no, but this deck is very comfortable just holding on to specifically like a Pokémon Nurse, and then shuffling the other 2 cards away each turn. Getting 2 more cards seen from the deck really helps. The other thing that Furret really helps with is that Furret can help you stock your deck at the end of the game. Now this is a play you will go for if you're going for the Tyranitar Giga Crush attack, the 5 energy attack that mills each player for 3 cards. If you're setting up your Tyranitar and you have almost certain victory ahead of you, what you can do is you can stock your deck with cards from your hand, repeatedly just throw cards back into the deck, that way your opponent decks out before you do. Even if they play something like a Town Volunteers to put 5 cards back in their deck, if you're putting back cards every single turn into your deck with Furret, you're usually going to win that war of attrition. They're going to run out of cards before you run out of cards. Worst case scenario, you can basically never deck out thanks to Furret, which is nice, because you can just fail to search, put 2 cards back, fail to search. You can never deck out, you can deck your opponent out with Larvitar or Tyranitar. So Furret is very, very important in this deck. I could see potentially even getting rid of the Porygon 2 line. To be honest, that line has not provided a ton of value in my experience playing the deck. Having that draw engine is really nice though, but Porygon 2 is basically only good if you have Furret online, so when you're setting up your board, unless you have a Porygon 2 in your hand, you should be prioritizing getting the Larvitars down and getting those Sentrets down. But like I said, you could potentially cut the Porygon2 line out for more Sentret, more Furret, or more trainer cards. And that's one of the problems with this deck, is that I just don't have the room in the deck necessarily for the trainer cards. This is not a list that's finalized, though I have had a lot of success with it. So let's talk about the trainer cards. 4 copies of Fan Club is a staple in almost every single deck in this format. It says search your deck for 2 baby Pokemon or basic Pokemon and put them into your hand. And this is just going to find our Larvitars and our Sentrets and our Porygons. It's a card you always want in your opening hand if you can help it. Pretty much every deck runs 4 in this format. I have seen some people running Dual Ball and Apricorn Maker. That's an engine you can definitely play with. Apricorn Maker is a card that searches your deck for 2 ball cards, and you can find Dual Ball with that. I just noticed we're a little bit off camera. There we go. You can find Dual Ball with that, and Dual Ball can find you your basics. However, it's kind of unreliable. I would still run Fan Club, especially in this deck. You really care about getting that consistent setup. Being able to find your basics not only thins them from the deck for better draws later, but also gets them on the board, so hopefully you can evolve them the next turn. Speaking of evolving, we have 4 Elms Training Method. Search your deck for an Evolution Pokemon. Absolute staple in this deck. If you were to add any other Evolution search, Fastball is pretty good. That is an item card instead of a supporter card, which just reveals cards off the top of your deck randomly until you find a Evolution. That is also pretty good. If you were to cut the Porygon out of the line, or out of the deck, I could see potentially adding in that Fastballs to increase the consistency of setting up your Tyranitar and your Furret. But as is, just for Elms Training Method, I would definitely not cut any of the Elms Training Method. If you do add the Fastballs, Fastballs are good. Elms Training Method is better. We don't mind taking a little bit of time as long as we get set up. Next up we have Professor Oak's Research. Professor Oak's Research is shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 5 cards. This card is very, very good at just continually drawing your hand. You have pretty low hand sizes in this format, so Copycat, not that great. Underground Expedition would be the other supporter that I would play if you want to play more draw supporters. This deck does run a very low amount of draw supporters, being only 4 of them, so sometimes this deck can feel a bit bricky. That's why we still play the Porygon2. Again, we potentially want more item search, we potentially want more draw supporters. You can't fit everything in one list. One of the reasons why we can't fit everything in one list is because we have these stability cards to keep us alive once our strategy goes. Because realistically, we're setting up 1 or 2 Tyranitar, and those are going to carry you through a game. Usually you do not need more than 2, sometimes you need a 3rd one. We have Pokemon Nurse to help us out. Once we have our Tyranitar online, it says remove all damage counters from one of your Pokemon, then you discard all energy attached to it. So for those of you who are around for Max Potion, this is Max Potion as a supporter card, allowing you to fully heal one of your Tyranitar. Tyranitar, again, huge HP, only takes 1 energy for the Destructive Roar attack, so you can just heal the Tyranitar with Nurse, and then take away like maybe 3 or 4 turns of progress. Again, damage output is really low in this format, and Tyranitar is going to eventually force the opponent to whiff an attack. And once they do, then you're just really out of control. It's really hard to stop Tyranitar once you get a turn of brevity. 4 Nurse is mainly just so we have it when we want it. I don't think I've ever seen another deck run 4 Nurse before. I think my deck is probably the only one that I've ever seen with this. But because our deck is relying on Porygon2 just kind of draw cards when we need them, you just want to see Nurse when you want to see it. Nurse is also helpful in the early game. If you have a Pupitar active, you don't really have your full setup, you can just heal the Pupitar. Again, 80 HP is pretty big. And don't worry about discarding the energy. We have a way to get them back most of the time. Don't heal a Tyranitar with like 5 energy, though. That is going to be bad. 1 copy of Town Volunteers. Town Volunteers shuffles 5 Pokemon or basic energy back into the deck. We don't run basic energy, so we're just going to be shuffling Tyranitars, Pupitars, Furrets potentially back into the deck. You could potentially cut Town Volunteers, but one of the things that I find helps is that a lot of other decks run Town Volunteers, and if we don't run Town Volunteers, they can kind of get a card advantage on us in their deck, which is going to take more time than to restock your deck, take turns off, things like that. This just gives you a one-time restock. But I could potentially see cutting the Town Volunteers. Again, you're never setting up more than like 3 Tyranitar to attack, so potentially you could add something like a Lure Ball, which would grab specifically evolutions back from the discard pile on a coin flip. If you want to change that around, test it a little bit. Again, this list is not finalized. Next up we have Energy Removal 2. This is a nice little throwaway card here. Flip a coin if heads, discard energy. So it's the same effect as the attack. It's Crushing Hammer. This time now literally Crushing Hammer because it's an item card. I've always found that it's very good in control decks to have cards I don't mind prizing. This is a nice, almost consistency card in not the way that it is a consistency card. It's not like a draw effect, but it's the kind of effect that could potentially slow your opponent down one turn. And it's also this kind of card where if you prize all 4 energy removals, it's not the biggest deal in the world as long as you keep your important pieces. So this is a card you can both prize and you can have it in hand when you want it. Now that said, it's not the strongest card in the deck, but considering the entire strategy revolves around removing energy, I think it's almost dumb not to run Energy Removal 2 in this deck. There is another Energy Removal card in this format, Super Energy Removal 2. That card is gimmicky as all hell, not really worth running in this format. Next up we have 4 copies of Super Scoop Up. This is a bit of a weird one. You don't often see Super Scoop Up in this format at all, and it's because you really need to both flip heads and have a Pokemon on the board to do it. I could potentially be convinced that Super Scoop Up would not be the play in this deck, considering we already have 4 Nurse, but it's another healing card in this deck. What Super Scoop Up does is that you pick up one of your Pokemon and all cards attached to it if you get a heads flip. Very, very strong card. Being able to return the card to your hand is very important, because Nurse, if we only ran Nurse as our only card to recover our Tyranitars to heal them, you eventually run out of energy cards, right? You discard a lot of energy, potentially could have a resource problem in the late game. Super Scoop Up does not have that problem. You can just pick up your Tyranitar and all the energy and then put another Tyranitar up and attach the energy. Very easy to help loop. More evolutions in play. Keep your board strong. Make it so the opponent can't break through you. Your opponent is going to be really, really pissed if you flip a Super Scoop Up heads when you have a heavily damaged Tyranitar with multiple energy attached to it. They are not happy about that. It also helps you get out of special conditions. One thing that Pokemon Nurse does not do is not recover special conditions from you. Now, special conditions are the biggest deal in the world because you're a really bulky Pokemon, but they will wear you down. Things like Poison and Burn exist in this format. Confusion is going to make it really hard for Tyranitar to attack, even if it's going to essentially do nothing to you. Damage-wise, we'll talk about that in a little bit. It's still really annoying, so being able to have an out for this is great. You could play Switch. I think Super Scoop Up's multifaceted, so I much prefer it. One of the late plays that you do in this deck, because you're not always able to get that build-up Tyranitar where you have tons of energy on it, is a late game play that I often do is I pick up a Tyranitar and I just go into a Larvitar once my opponent's board is kind of in the lockdown, and I start milling them. Worst case scenario, they're going to kill a Larvitar and I need to put another Tyranitar up again. They're still going to be down a bunch of resources because that Larvitar will probably take 2 or 3 cards off their deck in the meantime. So if you put your opponent in a position where they have no energy in play, they're not threatening an attack next turn, you can just kind of go in with Larvitar, start milling the deck. Reminder that Larvitar even heals itself, so weak attack will not take it out. Next up we have Power Charge. Power Charge is a trainer that says flip a coin if heads, shuffle 2 energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. This seems really, really bad, but we would like to have a way to recover our energy in this deck, and there's really not another good way to recover special energy in the format that I know of. I do not think that is an effect, so you have to rely on this coin flip card. This deck is going to run 12 special energy, which seems like a lot, but when you're using Nurse that can run out, a lot of times you'll have your first attacker lose an energy card, or your first like Pokemon that you start while you're setting up might have an energy card attached to it, like a Porygon trying to use its data sort attack might die with an energy card. You need to be able to get those back. We have 4 copies of Special Darkness Energy. Special Darkness Energy counts as Darkness Energy, but back then it also boosts the damage of the Pokemons attached to by 10. This isn't super relevant in our deck, to be honest, because we're not attacking that often. Occasionally can be relevant with Tyranitar. Really is not that relevant, though. The downside of Darkness Energy, unfortunately, is very, very high in this deck, which says that if you attach it to a Pokemon that's not a Darkness type, they take 10 damage in between turns. So it's essentially like a poison effect. If I attach it to my Furret's going to take 10 HP every single in-between turn stage. Really, really bad, but we need 4 Darks for Tyranitar, because he's what pays that. Next up, we have 4 copies of Rainbow Energy. Rainbow Energy counts as any type of energy. Since we can only run 4 Darkness Energy in this deck, we want to have extra outs to our Darkness Energy cost. Rainbow Energy pays any type of energy, but you take 10 damage when you play it. Just a little trick to learn about this deck is that if you start Rainbow Energy and you start Larvitar as your active Pokemon, you can attach Rainbow Energy to Larvitar and then use its milling attack to immediately discard a card off the top of the opponent's card and heal that damage counter that Rainbow Energy put onto you. That's a play I've done plenty of times because you want to be attaching to Tyranitar and milling anyway. So if you can attach the Rainbow and heal that damage before you evolve, that can potentially save you from a knockout. Very, very good. Very, very good card. The most important special energy in the deck, ironically though, is not the one that pays our attack costs at all, is Special Metal Energy. Special Metal Energy during this time says that the Pokemon it's attached to takes 10 less damage from attacks. You may be saying, well yeah, it does that in EX block and Diamond and Pearl, what's the difference? This doesn't say the metal Pokemon is attached to takes 10 less, this says the Pokemon. So Tyranitar will take 10 less damage from attacks for each metal energy attached to it. It also stacks, so you can attach multiple metal energy to Tyranitar and make it impossible to kill. This is where Super Scoop Up comes in. You can build up a huge Tyranitar and just pick it up out of play if you have multiple Super Scoop Ups in your hand ready to go. Super Scoop Up also helps Larvitar live early on. You can use that milling attack while having a Larvitar that's more bulky. It can also help these guys use their attacks early on without feeling pressured that they're going to be instantly knocked out. And also one of the big things that I was looking when I was building this deck is that Charizard Venusaur is a somewhat popular deck in this format. Jason Lazinski labels it as a top deck. I do not think it is that good, but it would have a fantastic matchup against Tyranitar because Tyranitar has 120 HP, and its whole shenanigan is, you're not going to knock me out. As it turns out, Charizard doing 120 will knock it out, but you can use Special Metal Energy to bridge the gap, make Tyranitar have an effective 130 HP, and now suddenly you do not get knocked out. Now you can create some really beast mode game states is the way I'll put it with Tyranitar in the late game. With that Giga Crush attack, since it takes 3 colorless energy, you can put 3 special metals on there, and you have a Pokemon with an effective 150 HP, dealing a okay amount of damage, and then milling each player's deck. Again, try to restock your own deck, that way you don't deck out. But also, one of the things that's worth mentioning is that Metal Energy does reduce your damage output by 10 for each Metal Energy you have attached to your Pokemon, so Tail Slap will only do 20 if you have 1 Metal Energy attached. And that's pretty relevant because the Metal Energy does prevent Tyranitar from being an offensive threat. You can definitely take some KOs with Giga Crush in the late game, but it's very, very hard to put on any amount of offensive pressure with Tyranitar in the early game because Special Metal Energy needs to be attached to it. Because you don't have that many energies, you don't want to attach multiple Darks to the same guy unless you're going for Giga Crush that turn. You don't want to lose those. So it's really hard for Tyranitar to make any kind of offensive output, which does kind of limit this deck. It can't take on some strategies like fighting decks because they just hit for way too much damage way too quickly and run you off the board with weakness ×2. But on the other hand, Tyranitar is impossible to break for some decks. Decks like the Gengar deck, where Gengar does -30 damage and then does another -10 with Metal Energy, means that Gengar's attack does 0 damage to Tyranitar. They're stuck attacking with Chansey, which is also not a good attacker and can be easily energy denied, not to even mention that as a coin flip attack. So this deck is very capable of destroying Gengar, which I consider the current probably best deck in E-Card, not that the format's played that much. But Tyranitar is very good at doing that. It's very good at beating, just for some other examples of decks that Tyranitar manhandles once it gets on the board. The Kingdra deck that relies on moving energy around the board. Does not like when you take away its energy at all, because it makes it very hard for it to do any of its cool attacks. It's very good against the Scissor deck, as long as you can get Tyranitar online and not bench unnecessary Pokemon. That could potentially be a downside. If you bench unnecessary Pokemon, you might get stuck, but even so, that deck's damage output is incredibly low and reliant on energy cards attached to the Scizor, so you can just remove those. And then there's also the Alakazam deck, which I found initially challenging. Alakazam is a deck that the Kadabra has an attack that accelerates 2 basic energy from the discard pile to Alakazam, so I kind of just wrote it off as a auto loss. How do I deal with this Kadabra that can just infinitely reattach energy, and then Alakazam, which hits for enough damage to actually get through resistance? And the real answer to that is that you just need to get rid of their basic energy, or their special energies, like their metal energy, or their bounce energy, or their rainbow energy, and then the rest of their deck does not really do enough damage. Like the Alakazams get resisted pretty hard, and it allows you to just build up a Tyranitar with 5 energy and deck them out with Giga Crush. If they're not attacking with Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno, they're not really doing enough damage to actually threaten your board. So I think Tyranitar is definitely a tier 1 deck if it sets up, is the big thing. This deck is definitely not as consistent as the other deck. It does not have as many setup supporters. If you wanted, like I said, you could potentially add Underground Expedition into this deck, or some other... I would not add Copycat. Underground Expedition, or like Fastball, something that finds its Pokemon and set up pieces when you want it. However, if the deck does get at least a serviceable opening hand, it feels almost impossible to lose oftentimes with this deck. Anyway, that's been this deck profile. I just wanted to do one, because I rarely make my own decks these days when I'm building so many of other people's decks with my retro deck collection. So when I'm actually passionate enough to build my own deck for a format, it's kind of an exciting thing for me. And I just want to share this Tyranitar Control deck, which I think has a lot of potential. And if there's an e-card tournament, I will definitely be playing this deck to it. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you back on the main channel sometime soon.